Hey guys, welcome to Common Ground. I'm Kinza Malik, and today we have the great Yousuf Syed here in the studio. Welcome.
What's up? I'm excited.
I know, right? I'm really excited. So Yousuf and I have known each other for a little while now. I don't know how many years.
I would say 8 years.
Oh wow. Okay, so since high school for sure.
More than 8 years, because you graduate 2010.
Yes.
So
been a while.
About 10 years. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. 10 years. Oh my God. Awesome. Okay, so Yousuf here graduated from Cal State Northridge, and he studied cinema, television, arts, and then had an emphasis on screenwriting, which is super exciting. And today we're going to be talking about diversity, really important. And so in our different segments today, we're going to be talking about diversity in college and in universities. And then kind of transitioning into Hollywood and media, which is very much, Yousuf can bring a cool take onto, right? And then we'll end with government and politics, which is kind of my area of expertise, and we'll kind of talk about our opinions and that sort of thing. Awesome. So let's get into our first segment. Cool. Okay, so we have some statistics on the board, which are super fun and very helpful. This is sort of the U.S. population broken up by different groups. So the importance of diversity, okay, in the workplace. So how has your personal experience been I know you've done internships, even just doing part-time jobs. What has been your experience so far?
Well, I think the coolest part for me is I got to do both sides. I got to intern and I was mentored by a Desi writer, South Asian American writer, right. Samir Gardezi. But I also I worked at a production company.
Okay.
And, obviously there was another Desi guy working there. He was also an intern. And actually, I think our main boss was Desi.
Okay.
But I never saw him. And I knew it wasn't a common occurrence.
Right, I was say. It's very rare.
Yeah, because, the other guy's name, I think, was like Osman or Nabil or something like that. They always called me Osman or Nabil. Okay. And I was there more than him. And they always got my name wrong. So, I think it's common for brown people to not be in that position. Right. So I think I gave them a pass at the time.
Right.
But, it's still definitely a white male dominated
field.
Definitely.
Totally.
Hollywood is definitely ran by white men.
Definitely. So the thing is, going back to, I think a lot of it in my experience, I have always been the only brown person, right? Most of the time I was usually typically the only brown girl, right? But then also, in most times, I've been the representative of South Asians in whatever job I was in, right? So that kind of goes back to part-time jobs that I had, and then also following just my campaign jobs, which is really weird if you think about it, because campaigns, if anything, are supposed to be the more progressive side of things, or the most progressive workplace environment. But even then, there's still a lack of representation of people who look like us. And
you would think that they're targeting, minorities.
Right. And kind of recruiting from that. So that was always weird, right? And Sarah and Miriam and I, these are my sisters, by the way, we always talk about, I don't know if you've experienced this, and so that's what I'm kind of leading to that question. Have you ever experienced certain things in the work environment where you're oh, I very much feel like I am different, right?
Yeah, I had instances where, luckily, my bosses were young, right. So I never had the generation gap or anything like that. But there was times where I think there was definitely a culture shock between the two of us. I remember the term, I was referring our weddings as brown people weddings.
Right. Okay.
And he's one of my bosses was it's funny that you say brown people weddings, because if I called you a brown person,
right,
it would be offensive. And I'm
right.
And I'm and then he went further into it, and he would go, what was it? He's it's you guys just switch up the words. It's
you guys.
You guys. He goes, people of color is the same thing as just calling someone a colored person. And
okay. How do you feel about that? Like, what is, like, you know, like when you hear that weird, what is like your reaction in like real time? Like, how do you?
I imagine my dad just like holding my shoulder and being like,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Like the whole Hassan Minaj thing where he's all like, you rise above and like.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, it's not to that level, obviously.
I think just growing up with immigrant parents, you kind of are raised to have like this passive mentality.
Right, no, totally.
And then, you know, on top of that, when you're at like an entry level job, you kind of have to have that immigrant mentality. So I'm like, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's like, I'm just gonna be, it's easy, but it's also easier to just be like, they didn't mean it in that way and just give them a pass.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Be the person be like, you know, that's kind of problematic.
Yeah. No, there's been other things that's been said in the office, and I really don't think they mean it, but I also think it's because they're just not around people of color.
See, right. No, and that makes sense, right? I remember someone had told, like, I get this all the time, so when people ask me where I'm from, right? Yeah. So you're kind of like, I'm from California.
Yeah.
And then you look at them and you wait, and they're like, oh, no. And they're like, where are you really from? And you're like, okay. You know, I've lived here my whole life. That's a common misconception, but also at the same time, it's this mentality that they have. And sometimes I feel like I kind of like think about, like, am I the person who's supposed to be like the person who's like, you know, like that mentality is not okay. You know, like, do I have the responsibility?
Yeah, because you don't want to like
perpetuate that. Yeah,
ignorance.
Totally.
You know, like
yes,
otherwise
exactly.
it's just gonna make them
totally. Yeah,
it's gonna hurt their ego.
Yeah.
And then.
But then who does it, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like, who's going to tell that person that like the way they're thinking, or because I feel like there also are ways to be like, hey, that's not okay, but without belittling them, right?
Right, and I think it's like the spinach in your teeth moment.
Right.
I think it's like you kind of have to pull them aside and be like,
you know what? Like,
yeah, but I think it's just it's such an uncomfortable situation to be in. Really I don't think anybody wants to be that person, and that's what makes it.
Agreed, right? And then also, again, you know, if you are like the only, you know, Pakistani person, you know, Asian person, right, in your office space, you already are like the minority, right? Just in terms of like numbers, right? And you're like, I'd rather just not rock the boat and like make it a little bit easier for people to accept the fact that I am here, right?
That's actually a really great point because, you know, my mentor, Samir Gardezi, has an amazing webinar series called Creators of Color. Mm-hmm. And he talked about being the only brown person in a writer's room because pretty much almost every time he's always been the only person of color.
Right.
Because it's almost like they're meeting a quota. You know, they're like, we have to have that one.
Yeah, and you're like,
you know, guy.
Yeah.
And he would talk about how, you know, it's never effective to just be a whistleblower and be like, that's racist.
Oh, right.
You know, especially when you're working in comedy writing, because obviously people get carried away with their jokes.
Definitely.
And they don't think about it. And he talked about like, he never wanted to be labeled as like the social justice warrior. Otherwise, they're just not going to renew his contract. Right. Mm-hmm. So essentially what he had to do was like have jokes ready on the side just in case when someone pitches a racist joke, he'd be like, how about this one? And then,
just be more combative and just like,
you know, it's one of those things where like, you know, they always say like minorities have to be, you know, twice as good.
Yeah.
You know, so
see, that's something you're just kind of like, okay.
There's things you have to be ready for.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's weird. And we always talk about this because so Sarah had mentioned this before to me, and Sarah was the only Pakistani person or even like Asian person on her team, right? And so she worked at a law firm, right, in New York City. It was a pretty like high profile law firm. Very prestigious people were working there. But the thing is she's like, I still like you feel like you've made it, right? You know, you're like, I grew up here. You cannot detect an accent in any of our, you know.
Yeah.
And so and then also at the same time we're college educated here, right? But at the same time when we do go into the workforce, we're just like there's this level of like, I'm still different. and there's things that you're reminded of, right? Like, I remember for her, she would want to come back home, and like it was a big deal. Obviously, Sarah would come back home often, right? I mean, and I remember one time I was talking to some coworkers about how I talk to my parents every day on the phone, and they were like, "What? That's crazy. That's too many times." And I was like, "No, like that's normal." And like a Pakistani household, like if you're not calling your parents every day, there's something wrong, right?
Right. Now my mom throws shade every day.
Yes, and then like
and I live with her, so
you're like, okay, can't run away from it. And so it's like there's certain things where you were reminded that you're different, and so like I was talking to my mom the other day. I was like, I wonder if like our kids are ever going to have to face that, and they probably won't, right? Because they'll be like we grew up here, and like we'll be more entrenched into things, and our mentality will be different.
I think about that, but sometimes I feel like nobody really teaches you how to be a parent. So I think sometimes we might just go based off of whatever our parents did.
Right, and that's like not
so, that
like, makes sense. Actually, that's a little terrifying to think about. Yeah. But, I mean, that's very much true. And, like, also at the same time, like, maybe it won't be as bad as, like, because our parents were still pretty, like, I think I was the oldest child, too, right? So my parents were very much, like, feeling out the water. They really didn't know, right?
I was the youngest.
Oh, see, there you go. We had different experiences in that sense. And so they were kind of filling out the water just like I was. We were both, it was like the blind leading the blind in that kind of scenario. Like I remember when I went to college, none of us knew what financial aid was, right? And so everyone's kind of learning together. So obviously when we have kids, like we'll know how to like have like a savings, or a college savings account for our kids, right? Or what financial aid is and like what schools are good, whatever, all those kind of things. And so like if we've all, we are all college educated, like I can only imagine where like next generation will go, right?
I mean, and like, bachelor's is becoming pretty much a high school diploma,
which is like terrifying because that was a nightmare.
Yeah. I'm not going back.
Right. I'm like, my parents keep asking, and I'm like, we'll see. So we've kind of touched about the workplace, and I kind of want to transition into college, right? And I feel like both of these things kind of lean on each other a lot, especially with, I think even nowadays, you were saying before, it's become kind of like the high school diploma, right? Equivalence. And everyone's going to college, which is great. I think it's so important that people go to college. It exposes you to new things. And I really do think people don't realize how much it really adds to you, right? Like you're on your own, you have so much responsibility, but also like you're learning things that you want to learn about, right? And you're really diving into really cool things. So this is a really cool chart. And this is broken down, different races, and their education. So the silver one, the gray silver one, is actually the bachelor degree. Okay. And so you can see the greatest one is Asians are the most educated, essentially, or have the most bachelor's degrees. Right. And so going into that, right, so we are the most educated, right? But then when you look at statistics in like the workplace, or even when we go into Hollywood, there's still like we're still like the minority. Like this is an interesting one about the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and that little blue right there, 1.8%, and we're the most educated. So it's like, what is happening here? This is not reflecting at all like what it should be, right? So the most educated, or at least people who are working the hardest, should reflect into like who's actually running these amazing companies. So that's an interesting part we were thinking about, and I think it's reflective of like how we grow up, right? Right. So I feel like when you're growing up, like who did you look up to?
God,
like was there any brown figure where you were like, that's who I want to be?
It's funny that you say that, because like it makes me think about like this whole thing about like Aladdin going on right now.
Okay, right,
and thinking like that was the closest thing that we had. Yeah. And I'm like, Aladdin wasn't even Daisy. I kind of had to claim him. Yeah. Because like the only other person I had was Apu. And I'm like not messing around with Apu. So yeah, like growing up, I didn't really have any brown role models. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like I was actually just talking to people about this back in the day, when you're kids, everyone would be like, oh, I'm Spider-Man, or I'm this. And like, as a kid, I was like conflicted with my storyline. I'm like, I can't be Peter Parker.
Right, you're like...
and I felt like my whole mind was like a YouTube comment section, just because like everybody was like, no, you can't be Spider-Man. Yeah. And so there's that, you know, and like we didn't have. That's why I think it's kind of cool right now. You know, you're getting your Riz Ahmeds, and not only that, they're in films like Star Wars and stuff like that. So kids are gonna look up and be like, oh, you know, Desi people are in Star Wars now.
That's what it is. And it's still, so like obviously, you know, this is like very much, I think, our generation, or even our parent generation, there's many actors or directors who kind of paved that way, right? But as much as they possibly can. And I was speaking with Gustavo earlier before this episode, and we were talking about how with like immigrants, we're trying to figure out why this, like, there is no there's a lack of representation, right? So again, even in DC, even in Hollywood, these are more like creative fields, or I mean more so Hollywood, but it's something that you have to step outside like academia kind of for, right? Or more so in the sense of like it's not a STEM major, it's not engineering. I think
it goes down to essentially the industries that are based on people that you know.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because we don't like.
Yeah, you know,
all of us are just starting off, and so we're kind of working on. Yeah, we're working on our own. You know, we can't really rely on too many connections, right?
Right.
And so I feel like when obviously when you're talking about the production company you worked, it was the production company you worked at that had the other Pakistani people there, or I don't know if it was just Pakistani, but like.
Yeah, it was just one Pakistani kid, but we never worked together.
Oh, okay. So the South Asian heavy office that you worked in, that's what I'm trying to get into is, see, like those people who are before you, or the man who you were saying who was like your mentor.
Oh, Samir.
Yeah, Samir. So it's interesting because like he's kind of paved a way, right?
Right.
And so he's opening the door for people like you, and then you're hopefully opening a door for somebody else behind you, right? And that's kind of the importance of it all, right? Is like the whole representation thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so for you, when you put things on your Facebook page and you say, hey, like I made this, this movie or whatever, and you're recruiting people for a script or something, and I feel like you've used a lot of they see people in your movies, and so you're paving that way for people and normalizing it, right? Because obviously you're not just friends with they see people, you're also friends with white people. I mean, a vast amount of people. And so the cool thing is your friends or your network is looking at your videos and saying, hey, this is a guy who happens to be brown and is making really cool content, right? And so I think you're kind of representing us in a good way, but not necessarily like shoving it down people's throats, right?
It's tough because, when you're a minority in any form of the arts, they, in film school and pretty much in any place that, is talking about making it and stuff, they'll always tell you yeah, it's great to have your culture and to incorporate that into your work. But at the same time, they'll tell you, make sure you don't overdo it, and it's because, and I've had other, for example, Muslim filmmakers tell me, don't make so many Muslim-centric films because at the end of the day, it could be the greatest Muslim film of all time, but it's only going to speak to a Muslim audience, so I think the most important thing, when we can talk about this when we get to Hollywood, but the most important thing about diversity is creating depth in your characters and your storyline. So where you can still incorporate diversity, but you have to bring it in a way where it's not coming off on the nose, and
I completely agree with this. Yes. Perfect. Okay. So I think this was a really good way to sort of kind of go into our next topic. And so I want to thank everyone who's watched so far in this segment. And again, thank you, Yousuf, for even contributing to this. I appreciate it.
I'm enjoying it.
But let's continue the conversation to our next segment. And so join us for our next one. Thank you so much.